Ever stood under a sky so wide your secrets felt small? Here on the Cowboy Alex story, we ride the stories of the West campfire truths, trail dust memories, saloon whispers, gritty humans sometimes messy. Every tale is a horizon to chase. Subscribe, pull up a stool, and maybe find a little courage for your own frontier. The slap cracked like dry kindling. Nora Hale hit the aisle plank and tasted dust and copper. The church in Sable Hollow held its breath. Boards creaked. Flies clung to hot glass. Reverend Silas Pike did not look at her. He faced the room, hand still lifted, voice steady about sin and softness and how the Lord required a firm hand. Eyes slid over Nora, not pity, a verdict already signed. She was on her feet before the hymn started. The door banged and heat took her. Arizona sun pressed down like an iron. The street ran thin between low buildings. A horse stamped near the hitch rail. The bell kept tolling behind her as if it could pull her back by the collar. She ran. Her ankles flashed chalk white under a plain dress. Mesquite tore seams and skin. A grasshopper bounced off her cheek. Wind carried grit into her teeth. She reached the river ditch, now a cracked gash that smelled of silt and old rot, and followed it past the last fences. The town shrank into a smear of wood and dust. Far out she slowed. Her throat burned. Her head rang. The land opened to thorn and saltbush with the distant blue of mesas, like a promise nobody kept. She found a squat shed sunk in weeds, an irrigation house from when someone had believed crops could live here. The roof leaned shingles cupped like black tongues. Beside it lay a square of timber in the ground, half-buried a door with iron hinges furred in rust. Nora scraped weeds with her hands. Splinters stung her palms. She hauled the door up inch by inch. It gave with a deep groan. Air rose from below that was cool and damp with a smell like potatoes in a cellar and old rope. She stared into the dark. A ladder rungs down into dirt walls. She put one foot on the first rung and felt the wood shift. Her heart beat so hard it made noise. Choice was a line like the lip of that hole. She went down. The cellar took her. She pulled the door until the light was only a pale seam, then just a memory. The heat left her skin. The sweat on her neck went cold. She sat with her back against earth that had been packed by hands long gone and listened. Her breath, the tiny chatter of an insect, a drop of something somewhere. She took the locket from under her dress, a small oval of tarnished silver with a hinge that stuck. The paper inside had bled at the edges, her mother's thin hand still clear enough to make out a shard. "I am not thine." The words shook inside her like water in a rattled cup. 2 days emptied from her. Hunger turned from a claw to a dull stone. Thirst sat like cotton in her throat. The first night cramps rolled through her and left. The second she slept and woke and did not know which was which. When she cried, it came dry, the sound of a broom on plank. Hoofbeats came as a tremor in the dirt above. She froze one hand flat to the wall. Leather creaked. A horse blew. Then a voice low and careful, not pushed through like a bullet. "If you're a rattler, rattle. If you're human, speak." Silence thickened. The cellar door shifted. Nora's fingernails dug into mud. A sliver of sky split the dark, hard and white. The voice again. "I ain't asking twice." "Please," her voice scraped like sand. "Don't." Boots scuffed. The door opened wide and noon sun burned her eyes. A man cut against it. Hat brim, black, shoulders lean. He squatted and the sun slid off his face. Cheekbones like planes. Hair to his collar. One side of his jaw held a fine silver scar, soft as a finger line. The web of his left hand had a puckered seam, the kind left by a knife or a bad stitch. "Nora Hale," he said, as if he were testing the taste of the name. "It is you." Her tongue moved slow. "Do I know you?" "Eli Cross." He lifted his sleeve and showed a pale, puckered ladder above his knee. "El Paso, alley behind the parsonage, 2 summers back. You boiled a needle over a candle, smelled like tallow and whiskey. You told me not to run on it." Memory stepped forward in her mind. A boy choking on blood in a hymn. A man at the back door with his hand pressed to his thigh, the feel of skin under her fingers. That was before the house went quiet and the Bible got loud. Nora retreated until the dirt pressed the ridge of her spine. She kept her hands close to her sides. Eli looked, then looked away. He took a canteen from his belt and set it on the lip of the cellar. He did the same with a small canvas roll, water and jerky. "I'll sit yonder by the rocks. Fire small, no smoke." She crawled forward only when he had moved away. The canteen metal was warm. The water inside was not. It hit her throat and flared pain that told her she was still part animal. She coughed and choked and drank again. Jerky tore salt into her mouth. The chew steadied her. Eli stacked mesquite twigs in a hollow where the wind leaned, set a match at the dry heart, and nursed a flame no bigger than a thumb. He fed it small, kept it from smoke. His horse, a dun mare with rough mane and kind eyes, hung her head and switched her tail. Eli stroked her neck. Easy, Juniper. Nora watched him from the edge of the hole. He did not glance back. He set metal on hot stone warmed coffee that smelled thin and bitter. The day bled into gold. Heat softened. A vulture traced a long, slow circle above a black comma in sky that would not end. She climbed out when the sun slid behind the low ridge. Her legs shook the way a winter calf's legs shook, trying to find the ground. Eli shifted to make room, but did not speak. Fire colored the good side of her face and left the other in shadow. The bruise from Silas Pike had flowered into purple. She could feel the swell when she swallowed. "Found me reading," she said. Her voice did not seem to belong to her. "A book my mother left." He said the words made me proud. Reverend Pike has a way of calling her to cure. She nodded once. The locket was warm in her palm. She did not open it. They ate a bit more. The fire clicked. The cold came on with speed that felt like a trick. The light went thin, then gone. Juniper shifted and snorted ears quick to each small sound. Nora pulled the blanket Eli had left draped over a rock around her shoulders and felt it soak up the damp in the air. She kept her eyes on the coal and did not look at Eli because something in her would give if she did. Wind came out of nowhere. It hissed through thorn and across stone, and then rain hit the ground in hard, flat drops. The fire spat and died. Cold slid down her back, sly as a snake. "The cellar," Eli said. They ran, bent into the storm. His saddle and gear were a crunch of leather. Mud slicked the lip of the hole. He went down, first set the gear back from the door. She followed Boots' squelching dress sticking to her legs. He pulled the door half closed and set a flat rock against it to hold it down. The rain drummed on wood, and then worked in through seams thin threads that turned the dirt at their feet into dark rope. They found the driest corner and sat with their backs to the wall and the blankets over their shoulders. Elbows touched, then shoulders. Nora's teeth chattered a quick involuntary music. The cellar smelled of wet cloth wood and old root. The only light was a thin, pale tongue at the crack where the door did not meet the frame. "Lean on me," Eli said. She stiffened. His hand hovered, then dropped. He adjusted the blanket so it covered both of them. Heat gathered between their bodies, small and stubborn. She tucked her hands under her arms. She set her cheek near his shoulder and breathed him. Leather, dust, smoke. Under that something like iron. His heart pushed against her upper arm, steady and strong. He did not move. The rain spoke. Her mind turned to the church and then turned away. She pressed the locket flat to her sternum until the edge bit. "Eli," she said finally, voice nearly gone to whisper. "Why did you come west of town?" "Water. Wash looked like it might hold some. Turns out it held you." She let that sit. After a while, her shivering eased. He shifted one time to tuck a wet lock of hair behind her ear. His fingers were warm and rough. The touch lasted less than a breath. It left heat that she felt long after. He kept the rest of his body still, as if stillness could be a gift. The rain eased to a steady patter, and then to the odd drop, the sound of a pipe emptying. Cold remained. They slept in pieces. When she woke, the door showed a paler seam. A bird called somewhere above a thin note that made the cellar feel deeper. Eli pulled the door open. The world above was washed and raw. The air had that sharp smell a storm leaves like stone and green sawdust. Clouds dragged their bellies along the rim of distant mesas. He looked at the sky and at the tracks the rain had made through the dust. "Stay here," he said. "Keep out of sight." He lifted his saddle. He moved as if each motion had been chosen before he made it. "I am going to town. We need coffee that does not taste like creek mud. Dry things. Salt." She turned her face up. Her lips had cracked and bled in the night red like a cartoon mouth. Sable hollow. "It is the only place with a counter." He handed her his second blanket, the one that held the cold or damp. "Bolt this door from the inside. If someone lifts it, let them strain. What if the preacher comes? Bolt it." He met her eyes for the first time without sliding away. There was no pity in his face. There was something that felt like a held vow. He climbed out. The wet plank under his boots gave a dull complaint. Juniper tossed her head and blew mist. Eli checked cinch and strap. He did not look back. Nora lowered the door. The cellar took his light and his shape. Only the smell of rain and horse and a trace of smoke lingered in the dark. She slid the bar into the iron catch. It fit like it had known its place for years. She put her palm to the wood and felt the faint echo of hoofbeats as he rode away. Light thinned to a pale band at the cellar seam and then climbed. Hours passed slow and heavy. Nora kept her palm on the wood, feeling for the faint thud that meant a horse and a man still existed in the world. Only once did footsteps cross above, quick and careless, then fade toward town. The drip near her boot stopped. The air settled. Eli rode into Sable Hollow with his hat pulled low and his shirt dark where the rain had soaked and then dried. Mud lay in long ruts across the street. The hitch rails shone with water. A boy swept the general store porch, pushing yesterday's dust into today's mud. People looked at Eli the way men look at weather that could break a fence. Not fear. The old steady strain that said something about him did not belong to them. Sheriff Whitaker leaned in his doorway with his thumbs hooked in his belt. He watched Eli cross the street, eyes small under his brim. "Folks like quiet," he said. "You plan to buy quiet, cowboy, or trouble?" "Flour, coffee," Salt Eli said. "Buy and ride," the sheriff said. "No need to make friends." Inside, the general store wood shelves smelled of soap and stale sugar. Eli counted coins on the counter, watching the man's hands instead of his eyes. The bell rang outside, high and urgent, not Sunday but carriage trouble. Voices rose into something like a prayer gone wrong. Eli took the paper-wrapped brick of coffee, the sack of flour, the salt tin. He stepped out. A black carriage had found the deepest rut and sat there, one wheel at a bad angle. The man in the suit, who owned half the valley, stood with one hand on the door and one on his temper. Malcolm Ridge filled the street without raising his voice. He gestured sharp and precise at a driver who could not find enough ground to push against. The other side door opened and a boy tried to climb down. He had a face too pale for Arizona and hair combed with water. He set a foot on the step, blinked like he could not make the ground hold still, and folded into the mud. "Arthur," Malcolm said, and the name came out stripped of iron. He grabbed the boy under the arms and lifted him to the boardwalk. The boy's eyes fluttered. His skin shone with fever. Men called for a doctor, then looked at each other because the doctor here did not know what to do past laudanum and prayers. Eli stood with his packages, feeling something from another life twist behind his ribs. He turned toward Juniper, thinking of the cellar and the door and the woman under it. He did not get 3 steps. "You!" Malcolm's voice reached him without being loud. "You! There!" Eli turned his head. Malcolm Ridge walked through the people as if they had been arranged for his use. He stopped, 2 close eyes quick and calculating. "Apache," he said. "Half," Eli said. "Half is enough," Malcolm said. He glanced at the boy on the board, then back at Eli's face, as if faces were something he weighed for value. "I need your help. I am no doctor." "You are blood," Malcolm said. He did not whisper. $100 for a little. "A test," the traveling man explained. "Purity. Strength. Your kind takes fever different." Eli did not look at the boy. He looked at Malcolm's eyes and saw the thing inside them that had built fences around water. "I ain't for sale." Malcolm's jaw worked once. He did not reach for Eli. He did not have to. His voice dropped to something that settled like cold in the stomach. "My men saw you yesterday west of town. Old irrigation house. Door in the dirt. Reverend Pike is offering prayer and coin for a girl that ran during service. You see how the directions line up." Eli kept his hands on the sacks. He let the words arrange themselves on his tongue before he answered. "You keep the sheriff off that ground. You tell the Reverend you saw her south toward the trading post. You set your men to water your own fences. You do that, I give you what your doctor wants." Malcolm did not smile. He nodded once. "Tonight, service gate by the barn, you will be met." His eyes slid to the sheriff and back. "You understand the conditions." Eli swung into his saddle, juniper blue ears flicking backward. He rode out with the weight of flour and coffee and something heavier in his bags. The cellar door lifted, and Nora's eyes narrowed against the white of noon. Eli set the packages down and could not quite look at her. "Coffee that is not creek. Salt. Dry cloth," he said. His voice sounded like it came from a room with a closed window. She watched him tie and untie a strap twice. The skin under his eyes had thinned. "Thank you," she said. It was a simple thing that stood in for the other things. He nodded and stepped away, building a fire in the lee of the same rock where last night had cooked them. He kept his hands busy until the light went soft. The ridge burned with a thin line of orange and let it go. Eli stood. "Sleep in the cellar," he said. "Cold rises quick up here." "You are not staying," Nora said. "Checking water in the wash," he said. He walked into the blue of coming dark. She watched the shape of him fade. She lay on the pallet and counted to 100, then to 100 again. When she slept, it was not deep. The service gate was a shadow within a shadow at the edge of Black Mesa Ranch. Lantern light bled under the barn door. The guard waited with his hands in his pockets, which meant his gun was close enough. "You cross," he said without interest. "Keene is inside." The barn smelled of fresh hay and old iron. Dr. Felix Keene had spectacles that made his eyes look like coins. He set a lantern on a crate and made a clean square of light. "Sit," he said. He did not ask Eli's name. "Tie off," he told the guard, and the man looped leather around Eli's upper arm and pulled until Eli's skin stood like a ridge. Keene tapped the hollow of Eli's elbow, felt for the line under the skin, and slid the needle in. It came with a cold pinch that went deeper than it should. Blood climbed the clear tube and marked the glass like a red mark on a doorpost. Eli breathed through his teeth and fixed his eyes on a knot in a plank. He thought of a match head, flaring of the smell of hot coffee of words in a locket he had not read. When Keene loosened the strap, Eli felt the sweat at the base of his skull. "2 jars," Keene said, as if calling for biscuits. That was not the talk, Eli said. Keene looked over his shoulder. Malcolm watched from a line where Lantern did not reach hands behind his back. He did not move. "We are measuring," Keene said. "We will be quick, if it pleases you." It did not. Eli watched the second jar fill and then stop. Keene pressed cloth to the puncture and told him to hold. He did. The blood beaded and slid into the cloth. Keene's hands were quick and neat. He tied a square of linen where Eli's skin had been whole. "Water," Meat Keene said, wiping the needle. "Safety," Eli said, standing. He set it to the dark line where Malcolm's suit cut the light. Malcolm nodded once and turned away. The knights collected. Eli slept and did not feel rested. His hands began to shake when he tried to button a cuff. His lip cracked where he licked it. Coffee smelled either like heaven or like nothing at all. In the morning he spilled grounds and swore under his breath. Nora sat with thread and cloth that she was turning into something warmer than a dress, and she watched him without letting him know she watched. He left in the dark and returned in the gray thinner as if the night had eaten. "Your wash is low," she asked once. "It is rocks," he said. She found juniper in a box cut a mile off the main path, tied so the mare could nose at a patch of brown grass. The tracks out of the cut were fresh and clear to someone who was not a tracker. Nora set her jaw. She returned to the cellar and waited for the place between dark and dawn, when Eli slept without moving. When his breath found a slow, steady rhythm, she rose and took the blanket and the knife and the courage that had come from somewhere she did not recognize in herself. The land held its breath while she walked. She kept to the swales and the shadows of mesquite. Black Mesa Ranch rose with its white walls and its black timber and its gate too wide for any house that claimed to be humble. She kept her body close to the brush and moved along the outer fence until she found the service gate gapped with carelessness. Voices murmured in the barn. She came up under a dirty window and used her sleeve to rub a circle in the grime. Light cut a square in her eye. Eli sat on a stool with his back to her. The line of his shoulders had changed. The guard's hand pulled the strap tight and Keene tapped the spot. The needle found him. Red climbed again. Nora forgot to breathe. Something low and hurting started under her ribs and climbed her throat. The jars looked like church glass colors wrong for Sunday. Keene lifted one and turned it a bit, admiring the clarity. Malcolm's profile made a black notch at the edge of the light. A sound escaped her too small to call a cry, the kind a rabbit makes when it sees its own blood. The guard at the door turned his head, distracted enough to take one hand from his gun. What was that, he said, as much to fill the space as to ask. Eli's head came up. He did not move the arm with the needle in it. He stood with his eyes. He saw the small circle of window where a breath had cleaned the glass and the pale there that might be a face. He tore the needle from his arm and blood came like a quick red tear. The guard flung the barn door open and pulled light into the yard. He stepped out and saw her. He did not recognize anything about her except she did not belong here. He grabbed her wrist and squeezed. "Look what the night coughed up." Nora met his eyes, then looked past him. Eli stood with blood at his elbow linen slack and useless jaw tight. Malcolm moved one step into the light face set the way a banker's face sets when a debtor begs and the math does not sing. "You fool," he told Eli. "You bring your girl to my door." The words fell on Nora and did not stick. She pulled against the guard's hand without success. Keene said something about contamination that no one heard. Eli took one step toward her and 2 men who had been smoke until then set their hands to their pistols. The night behind Nora felt as open and black as a well. Malcolm's eyes made the shape of a smile without turning his mouth. He gestured at the jar. "There it is," he said to Nora. The price of your safety. It is not sermon cheap. It is paid in a way a reverend would understand. Nora's chest rose and fell, and she could not find small breaths. She looked at Eli and saw the shame on him like another man's coat. You traded me, she said. Her voice was quiet. You are no better than the man with a Bible. Eli's face flinched like someone had tossed him cold water. He opened his mouth but did not find words before hers kept coming. He hit me to keep me safe. You bleed yourself to keep me safe. I am a law you write. I am not yours to save. The guard's fingers dug harder, anger answering the insult he thought he heard. Nora turned her wrist and felt the slick of her own sweat under his hand. She stepped toward him suddenly, not away, and he shifted his weight. She brought her knee up hard. He cursed and let go. She shoved against his shoulder and ran with everything left in her. Eli moved. The nearest gun came up and he was already across the space, not fast, just committed. He slammed the shooter's wrist against a post, and the shot went into the rafters and knocked down straw and curses. He put his hand on the man's face and pushed, and the man stumbled into a stack of harness. Blood from Eli's arm made a line on the dirt, bright even in lantern light. Stop her, Malcolm said, calm and useless. Boots hit packed earth. Nora's feet found mud, and then gravel, and then the hollow sound of the service gate. The night took her shape, the way the cellar had taken silence. Behind her, men shouted. Eli shouldered a second man and lost his balance for a heartbeat. Keen called for cloth. The lantern hissed. Juniper, tied far from here, lifted her head at a noise only she understood. The yard filled with moving figures, now light, now shadow. Nora did not look back. She set her eyes on the cut of land beyond the wall where thorn made a black lace. Her breath rasped like something lit it. The ground tilted under her. She pushed harder. Eli wiped his own blood on his trouser leg because it was on his hand and would make the world slippery. He found the doorway with his body and hit it, then found it again. Someone grabbed his shirt and he tore free. The night outside was a mouth waiting to swallow. He did not think about the men or the money or the doctor or the way his heart was punching the inside of his chest. He thought of the locket that had left a mark on Nora's skin where metal had bitten in the cellar. He went into the dark after her. The dark outside the barn had no edges. Nora ran toward the fence where the mesquite made lace against the sky. A thorn snagged her skirt and ripped it wide. The ground tilted and caught and tilted again. She went through the service gate without touching it and felt the night take her. Eli hit the yard and found only churned mud and a gate that rocked on tired hinges. Men shouted behind him, all boots and orders. He cut left into shadow, and then into more shadow, breath hard, arm wet from the ripped vein. He did not call her name. Sound would draw the wrong ears. He set himself to the simple work of following a shape that had no light. The land opened to low flats broken by dry washes. He kept low where the wind wrote lines in the dust. He lost her and found her again in the way bent grass remembers. Juniper waited in her box, cut with patient eyes. Eli left the mare and kept on foot. He moved until the sky thinned, then thickened, then let a line of pale rise in the east. Heat came back like a debt that had not been paid. By noon, the Badlands lifted in broken teeth. He found a slot where red rock had split, and the shade was narrow and deep. Air there felt cooler by nothing more than hope. He saw prints that matched her boots. At a turn where the light made a bright coin on the wall, he saw her. Nora sat with her back against sandstone, arms around her knees. Her face was white with dust, except where sweat had made small paths. Her lips were cracked. The bruise on her cheek had turned yellow at the edges. She did not look up until his shadow crossed her legs. She flinched, then steadied. You should not have followed. He stood a few paces off and closed his hands on air. You left me in that barn, he said. It came out flat. It was the only sentence he could build that did not catch fire in his mouth. You traded me in that barn. Her voice was calm and full of heat at the same time. He held up a jar like a candle, and you let him tell me what I cost. I traded me. He set his hand against the wall and felt grit grind between skin and stone. I told Ridge he could buy your safety with my blood, not yours. Nora shook her head. You made a cage and called it mine. You used yourself like a chain. That preacher hit me and said it was love that hurt. You bleed and say the same thing in new words. She swallowed. It looked like it hurt to do it. I will not live like a sin that needs paying. The canyon held their breathing and gave it back to them in pieces. A fly walked the rim of Nora's cup that was only her hands in a cup shape. Eli kept his eyes on the wall because if he set them on her face, he would reach. He spoke low. I thought the paying was mine. She wiped her mouth with the back of her wrist and looked at his arm where the linen was dark. You always think the paying is yours. He let his weight fall to a sit across from her. He felt the drag in his bones from the jars and the nights and the miles. He put his elbows on his knees. I had a sister, he said. Her name was Aura. She said no to a foreman who did not hear no. They tied a rope to a cottonwood. I cut it. I cut him. He bled hot, and I learned what a man looks like when you take his wind with your hands. Nora did not move. Her eyes stayed on his face steady and open. They hunted me, Eli said. Not for him, for what I am. They shot her at the river. She fell with her hands in the water. I have been paying ever since. Every time I find a place to stand, the ground says you owe. Every time I see a girl run, my hands look for a knife. Nora took the locket from her neck and laid it in his palm. The silver looked small there. The hinge stuck as always. My mother wrote words in it. I do not need them now. She waited while he opened it. The paper had gone brown at the edges, the script thin and slanted. I am not thine. The letters looked stubborn. She closed his fingers over the oval. I am not a debt. I am not a sermon. I am someone who chose to go down a ladder and shut a door. I can choose other things. He kept the locket in his hand and felt the cool against the lines there. He looked up. I do not know how to stop paying. Then learn. She crawled across the grit until she was close enough to touch him. She did not reach for his face yet. She put her palm on his chest, where his heart made a hard push. Stand with me, not for me. Do not make a deal without me in the room. He let his breath go. The canyon watched like a patient thing. He nodded. It was not a grand vow. It was a small one that held weight. No more deals without you in the room. She tipped her head and kissed him. It was not a soft kiss. It took what it wanted. He answered with a careful hand at her shoulder and another at her back, pulling her in like a man uses both hands to hold a rope that lifts him out of a well. Heat was a thin skin around them and then inside them. Sand pressed pattern into knees and palms. He tasted salt and dust and the thin copper that still rode his mouth. When they pulled apart, the light at the mouth of the slot had moved an inch. They sat with their foreheads together until their breathing matched. Nora laughed without sound, one short piece of air that felt like a crack in a shell. You smell like coffee and iron. He took her hand and pressed it to his mouth. You smell like rain in a cellar. They moved in the heat and the shade through the afternoon and found the ditch that would guide them back toward the shack. Juniper stood where Eli had left her, patient as always. She bent her head to Nora's shoulder and breathed her in. They walked the mare and did not ride her legs, and were carrying them farther than sense. By night, the irrigation house rose out of weeds. The hatches and scarred boards looked known. The door to the cellar was a black square against the lighter ground. They lifted it and went down with the care of people who had already learned where the rungs creak. Eli laid the locket on a flat stone and set his palm on it for a breath, then slipped it back around Nora's neck. They ate little and fell asleep while the fire outside backed itself down to coal. Morning came clear and close. Nora made coffee that tasted less like creek and more like itself. She watched Eli's hands when he lifted the tin cup. The tremor was small, but there. She said nothing. She looked at him, and he looked back, and it felt like a thing had shifted and found a seat. A rider came from the east when the sun stood the width of a hand above the ridge. He stopped 50 yards off and did not get down. His hat had dust all along the brim. Ridge wants the half-breed, he called. Boy is worse. Doctor wants more. He spat and rubbed his mouth. Tonight. Eli stood with his fingers closed around the cup. Nora put her hand on his sleeve. Tell him no. The rider watched with the disinterest of a man asked to carry words rather than care. Eli set the cup down and strode a few paces toward the horse. Tell Ridge I heard him, he said. The rider wheeled and went without adding or taking away. Nora turned to Eli. Run with me, she said. Her voice had no tremble. We can reach the hills if we leave now. We can be nothing to him up there. Eli held her shoulders and searched her face for anything but resolve. He found only resolve. He used you to hold me, he said. He will keep using you. I end it. He touched her cheek where the bruise had gone to green under the yellow. I end it, and then I run with you. She shook her head. There is no end with a man like Ridge. There is only distance. He kissed her slow and let his lips rest on her brow after. I come back to you, he said. He was not loud. It sounded like the square vow from the canyon set now on a new table. He took the rifle and his hat and walked out into a light that made every edge sharp. Night sucked him in. He came back near dawn, body burnt to a thin string that held. The linen on his arm had bled through and stiffened. He ate what she put in his hands and lay without undressing. She sat with her back to the wall and watched him sleep with the steady attention of someone guarding a candle in a draft. Another night took him. Another dawn returned him. The space between grew long and heavy. His hands shook when he tried to tie a knot. His mouth cracked and bled, and he licked it without thinking. He cursed once when grounds fell into the fire and then apologized to the empty air. Nora stitched the new shift by lantern and cut strips of cloth for bandages with careful hands. She practiced loading the revolver until she could do it by touch in the dark. He gave her the rifle and told her to practice on a mark he scratched into a stump, a small circle high enough to make her reach. "You should know how," he said. He stood behind her and set her elbows. He stepped back when her breathing steadied. The first shot was wide, the second less so. The third made dust jump an inch from the mark. He nodded and let the nod be a long sentence. By the fifth night, his eyes had a gray to them that no sleep could wash. He tried to stand and the cellar tilted. He touched the wall with an open hand and slid down it until he sat. Nora crossed the dirt in 2 quick steps and caught his shoulder. "Eli," she said. He lifted a hand like a man waving away a fly. It fell back. His head dropped forward. His breath came in a thin scrape. Heat poured off him in a way that had nothing to do with blankets or weather. She pressed her palm to his forehead and felt the burn. "Eli," she said again. He did not answer. His chest rose shallow and fast like a bird's. The lantern sputtered and burned steady. The cellar felt small. She fetched water in a cup and touched it to his lips. He did not swallow at first, then did a small, obedient movement like a child. She laid him flat and pulled the blanket up and tucked it under his shoulders and knees. She set her own body between him and the damp wall where cold might creep. His skin shone with sweat. He shivered and burned at the same time. Outside, coyotes called to each other in thin notes that made the hair on her arms lift. She tucked the locket inside her dress where the metal could not touch the cold air and hurt. She set her hand on Eli's chest and counted. The beat was there. It was too fast. She kept her hand there and counted again. By afternoon, Eli's fever broke enough for him to wake. The light in the cellar was a pale strip. His face looked carved-down eyes clear in a haunted way. He pushed himself upright, jaw set. "I am going to Ridge," he said. Nora sat back on her heels. "You are burning. Sit." He stood anyway, one hand on the wall until the room steadied. "He used you to hold me. I end it." She saw there was no ground between his choice and the door. She took his hat from the peg and pressed it to his chest. "Come back." He nodded once. It felt like a nail going in. He took the rifle, then left it by the ladder. He strapped on his belt and climbed into the washed light. He rode Juniper straight down the track, no hiding. The sun hammered the white walls of Black Mesa Ranch. He tied the mare where the boss tied, walked through the cool of a shadowed hall, and into a study that smelled of leather and smoke. Books lined the walls. A decanter caught a band of light and threw it onto the carpet. Malcolm Ridge stood at the window with a glass in his hand. He turned with a smile that had no warmth. Cross. The boy stood today. He lifted the glass as if toasting the room. A miracle. "Sit. I will stand," Eli said. His voice was dry and even. "The deal is over. Your son breathes. You call your men off that ground. You tell the Reverend to take his prayers home." Malcolm set his glass down and came around the desk. "Dr. Keene believes a small reinforcement is prudent. A booster, he says. Science is a cautious thing. We had a talk," Eli said. Malcolm walked closer. He smelled like good soap. "We had an understanding. Circumstances change. Also, there is the matter of a warrant. Sheriff Whitaker is a man who serves paper when it suits. Corrupting a minor plays poorly with the faithful. I told him I would keep you out of sight. That is generosity." Eli's hand found the butt of his gun and rested there. He did not draw. "You cannot keep me." Malcolm rang a small bell. The door opened. 2 guards came in, the kind of men who had learned how to move furniture that fought back. Eli lifted his gun and never cleared the holster. A pistol butt found his temple. Light jumped and went black. The world came back slow and ugly. Rope bit into his wrists and ankles. He lay on a plank floor that smelled of creosote and horse. The carriage house had no windows, only a door with light at the bottom like a knife edge. Heat pooled and climbed. His head throbbed a steady drum. He rolled and felt the rope burn skin. He listened to the click of a latch that would not open for him. Nora waited through evening and into night. No hoofbeat came. Coyotes yipped and fell silent. She lit the lantern and watched its flame lean when the draft pushed under the door. She waited until waiting felt like drowning. She blew the light and climbed out. Sable Hollow had cooled without softening. The boardwalks were empty. The jail lamp burned. Sheriff Whitaker sat with his boots on his desk, reading a handbill. He looked up at her with a slow smile that never reached his eyes. "I am looking for Eli Cross," Nora said. Her voice held steady. "Malcolm Ridge has him." "Then you talk to Ridge," the sheriff said. He let his boots fall and stood big in the small room. "You come in here smelling like sin and sermon both, and tell me my work. Reverend Pike pays good coin for a lost lamb." His eyes fell to the front of her dress and stayed. "Maybe there is a way to settle your debt." Her hand moved before she let herself think. The crack of palm on cheek filled the room. The sheriff's face went red. He reached, but she was already through the door, already running. Booth heels clattered on plank. Someone laughed in the dark outside a saloon and then went quiet. She reached the irrigation house as dawn rinsed color into the land. The cellar door lay in the weeds, splintered. Blankets, tins, the small pile of their world, had been kicked and scattered. Horses had churned the ground to a mess. Her mouth filled with the taste of metal. For a long moment she could not move. Under a broken board, the rifle lay with dust in its sight. She pulled it free and felt its weight settle along her arms. The box of cartridges had spilled. She pocketed what her fingers could find. She tied her hair back with a strip of cloth that had been part of her dress. She took the mare trail toward Ridge. The light was clean and merciless when she reined in 100 yards from the carriage house. One guard lounged at the door, thumb hooked in his belt as if guarding were a habit that bored him. She lifted the rifle to her shoulder. "Let him go," she called. Her voice was flat and carried. The guard squinted. "You must be the church girl. You are late." He lifted his pistol and aimed past her, already thinking of the story he would tell. Nora set the bead an inch high and right. She squeezed. The shot tore splinters from the lintel. The guard flinched down and cursed. Inside, Eli heard her voice, and something that had been drained all week came back hard. He rolled to the door and kicked. Old wood cracked. He kicked again. Pain burst up his leg into his hip and back. The latch split. The door slammed outward and took him with it into sun and heat and noise. The guard scrambled to his feet. Eli barreled into him with rope on his wrists, and no grace. They hit the dirt. The pistol went off wild and took dust off a wheel. Eli drove his shoulder into ribs and heard a cough grunt that sounded like victory. "Knife," he said through his teeth. Nora was off the horse and at his side. She yanked the short blade from the guard's belt and sawed at the rope. The fibers bit her fingers. The rope gave with a dry snap. Eli grabbed the knife and cut his ankles free with 3 hard strokes. "Up," he said. He pushed her toward the mare. She swung into the saddle. He mounted behind her and put his knees to Juniper's sides. Men ran from the main house guns in hand. A voice shouted orders that tried to make chaos obey. Someone flung a lantern into the barn door to block the path. The oil went like a bright sheet. Dry hay took. Heat rolled. Smoke pushed low, then climbed. Juniper danced ears flat. Eli leaned forward and gave her his voice. "Go, girl." He aimed her for the side where the corral rail left space. Flame licked overhead. Nora ducked hair flashing copper. The mare gathered and went through heat that curled hair at her fetlocks. Gunfire cracked. A bullet sang by Nora's ear and took a piece of air with it. Eli fired once back, quick and steady. A silhouette at the corner folded. They hit open ground and did not slow. The ranch fell behind a bright edge in the rear of the world. The Badlands rose ahead, broken and waiting. The wind took the smoke smell and left only the harsh breath of thorn and dust. They rode until Juniper's stride shortened and went uneven. Foam flecked her neck. The sun climbed and leaned and climbed again. When the mare stumbled and went to her knees, Eli pulled her head and spoke into her ear. She tried to rise. Her legs shook. She sagged, eyes rolling, and went still. Nora slid down and set her hand on the mare's neck. The heat there left fast. Eli stood with one hand on the withers and his jaw locked. "Good girl," he said. He cut the canteen and the reins free. He looped the reins and shouldered them. "We walk," Nora said. They went into the broken country. Stone baked. Air wavered. The ground sparkled with mica and bit with thorn. Eli's old wound in his thigh, the one she had sewn years ago, opened again under the strain he had been forcing it to bear. His boot darkened. He hid the limp until he could not. When she saw the wet, she did not speak. She tore her dress for bandage and tied it tight with hands that had learned to knot clean and hard. By dusk, Eli's teeth rattled when he tried to drink. He talked little. When he did, his words came sideways like he was tugging them from another time. Painted Canyon, he said. Nantan is north. He moves camp. He will take us if I ask in the right tongue. They followed the red rock wall that looked like a ship. A dog barked once ahead and silence fell like a lid. Men stepped out from brush with rifles held not high, just certain. They had hair braided and eyes that did not move much. Eli spoke in a language that lifted softer than his English. He said a name, Nantan Greyhawk, and a kin word. The men looked at Nora as if she were a puzzle with sharp edges. They parted. A man older than Eli, with lines cut deep at the corners of his mouth, came from between two wickiups made of willow and hide. Nantan looked from Eli to the blood on his leg and back to Nora. He did not smile. He did not frown. He spoke in English clear and precise. You brought the hunt. I brought a woman, Eli said, voice rough with pain. I brought my life. Nantan gave the smallest nod. He gestured. 2 men took Eli under the arms and carried him into the largest shelter. An old woman whose hands shook only when she was still took charge of the wound. The shelter filled with the clean, bitter smell of crushed sage. She washed the leg with water warmed by a stone and packed the angry flesh with paste that smelled of pine. She bound with strips of deer hide that tightened as they dried. Nora sat at Eli's shoulder and held him when fever tried to lever him from the floor. His eyes went glassy. He murmured in Apache, then in English, then in the broken place between. He said a girl's name the way a man says sorry when nobody is listening. Nora wiped sweat from his face and squeezed water into his mouth with a scrap of cloth. Nantan came at dusk of the second day with news fixed in his posture. Ridge riders, he said, from the south, bluecoats from the east. They smell smoke and think it is theirs. Eli pushed himself up on his elbows. The world tilted and came back. We go through the narrows, he said. You hold them here and you die for a debt that is not yours. We are not the ones who die, Nantan said. We are the ones who vanish. He looked at Nora. His eyes had no softness, only a certain kind of respect for a thing that endures. She is not one of us. She is not one of them. She is trouble. Nora met his gaze and did not drop it. I will take trouble with me. At first light, the rifles spoke at the mouth of the canyon. The report cracked off rock and doubled. Nantan's men fired from shadow. Ridge's men scattered for cover and tried to make the land obey them. Dust lifted in little clouds where bullets kissed stone. Circle to the pass, someone shouted in English. 3 men broke right climbing toward a ledge that looked down into the camp. Eli saw it. He levered himself upright and took the rifle. Come, he said to Nora. They ran low, keeping rock at their shoulders. He stopped in a spot where he could see the ledge and tried a breath. His chest felt tight in a way that had nothing to do with running. He fired once. A man on the ledge jerked and slid. He fired again, and the second man dropped to his knees and went over the edge. The third man fired back. The bullet found Eli high on the right chest. He felt the punch more than he heard the shot. Air left in a sound like someone had pulled a cork. Heat ran down his side. He looked at Nora and saw her mouth open without sound, and then with it. She got under his arm as his knees gave. Nantan appeared like a shadow unrolling. He took the other side. Up, he said. It was not a request. They moved into the tight cut of red stone that twisted like a snake. The gunfire fell away to a distant pop. The path took them into a cleft with a lean-to shack, half sunk into a bank of crumbly dirt. The roof sagged. The door hung on a single hinge. Here, Nantan said. He set Eli on the dirt floor. He looked at the blood-soaking Eli's shirt. He looked at Nora's face. Something in his eyes changed that was not softness. It was belief in a particular kind of stubborn. You work quick, he said. He left without sound. The canyon took him back. Nora tore the shirt open. The hole bubbled dark. The exit wound did not show. She ran for the seep she had seen under a ledge and filled the canteen with water that tasted like stone. She built a small fire from wood that had been stashed dry under the shack's roof. She held the knife in the flame until it glowed. She crushed sage under a rock and poured hot water over it, the steam rising with a smell that filled her head. Forgive me, she said, and set the edge of the hot knife to the wound. The flesh hissed. Eli did not wake. She cut with the care of a seamstress working blind. She searched with 2 fingers and found hard metal. She gripped it with the tips and drew it out. It came free, slick and ugly, blood welled. She packed the hole with the cleanest cloth she owned, the lining she had kept for a hem that would never be sewn. She wrapped tight with the reins she had carried from juniper. She lifted his head and poured a thin stream of sage water to his lips. Some went in. The rest ran into his hair. She wiped his face with a scrap and watched for the rise of his chest. It came quick and shallow. Night leaned in close. Coyotes sang far and thin. She put more wood on the small fire and watched the flame climb and settle. Eli burned without waking. He called for someone who was not her. She put her hand on his chest, where the beat ran too fast. She counted. She counted again. She hummed the scrap of a tune her mother had left in the locket, a few crooked notes that made the air feel less empty. The flame sank to a bed of red and then rose when she fed it. The shack breathed heat and then chill. Nora sat with her back to the rotten wall and watched the shadow of his profile against the boards. She listened to his breathing and the small sounds inside the night that mean the world is still turning. She wiped his face again when sweat ran. She set the bullet on the plank beside her and looked at it until it blurred. She touched the locket at her throat and let it rest under her palm. She laid the other hand on Eli's ribs. The beat did not steady. The hours pulled long and did not give. She kept her hands where they were and did not move. The fever ran its course like a river that had to find the sea. Eli woke to a thin band of light at the shack door and the smell of sage gone warm. Nora slept sitting up, chin to chest, hands still on him, as if she had tied him to the world with touch alone. He tried a breath and winced. The pain was sharp and honest. It told him he was still here. She woke at the scrape of his sleeve. Her eyes went wide, then soft. She held water to his mouth. He swallowed, and the drink hit bottom like rain on hot rock. For a time they moved inside small tasks. Cloth changed, fire coaxed, a spoon touched to lips. Words were few and careful. When he slept, he did not thrash. When he woke, he watched her hands. They steadied him the way a good horse steadies a man who has forgotten how to sit. On the second day, a shadow filled the door. Nanton set a small leather pouch on the floor. Jerky, a handful of parched corn, a look that weighed both of them and found them possible. Riders went home with their dead, he said. Bluecoats went back to their pay. He nodded at the strip of sky. Move when you can. When Eli could stand without feeling the earth tilt, they left the shack. They followed the line of red rock until the ground remembered the irrigation ditch. They walked with the sun at their backs and then at their shoulders. By the third day, the weeds and the warped boards of the old house rose out of the land. The hole gaped black where the cellar had held its breath for them. They slept one more night under the plank roof of what had saved them and then knew they could not sleep under it again. Eli left Nora in the shade and stepped into town with a limp and a stick. People looked and then looked again, squinting as if his shape would change if they gave it time. The general store took his last silver with a shrug and slid flour salt in 10 cartridges across the counter. A freight driver at the back watched him with a kind of measuring that was not quite hostile. You cross, the man said. So I hear, Eli said. Ridge's boy died, the driver said, voice low, as if the words might break. Fever came back hard. That city doctor tried to drain and pour like a whiskey trick. Folks ran him out at the point of ideas and sticks. The storekeep leaned on the counter like it might have ears. Ridge sits in his big house and talks to nobody. Sheriff has lost his taste for sermons. Eli stepped out and put the flour on his shoulder. Sheriff Whitaker stood in the street with his hand near his holster by habit and no clear plan. His eyes narrowed, then shifted. Still a warrant, the sheriff said. You gonna serve it, Eli said. The sheriff looked at Eli's stick, at his thin face, at the marks on his hands that said work and not sin. He unbuckled his belt and let the gun hang on the hitch rail. I can take you without iron. Eli set the sack down and waited. The sheriff swung hard and faded his own punch by stepping wrong. Eli let the strike glance off his shoulder and put a quick hand in the sheriff's ribs, not enough to break enough to find wind. The sheriff swung again. Eli moved his head a finger's width and the knuckles took air. He put his own fist into belly. The sheriff folded and found his knees. Eli had one clear shot at the jaw and did not take it. He reached a hand. The sheriff slapped it away and picked up his belt. Get out of my street, he said, cheeks red. I do not see paper. Eli carried the flour to the ditch road with his breath tight and his head full of nothing but the path. He told Nora what he had heard. She listened and then stood. I will know about Pike, she said. She washed her face and combed her hair with her fingers until it lay in a dark line down her back. She walked into Sable Hollow alone. The storekeep's wife put a hand on the counter when Nora asked as if she needed a brace. He passed, the woman said. Saloon cut him. He bled on a floor that never saw a prayer. Nora's throat worked. She felt the hollow open where fear had lived. Air filled it. It did not hurt. They did not shut the cellar again. They hauled what wood they could find from a wash and from a ruined fence and from a beams pile left when a farmer had given up on rain. Eli showed Nora how to notch a log so it sat into another and would not slide when wind spoke. He set stakes and ran a line and measured by eye the way men do when they have nothing but hands. Nora's palms blistered, then tore, then toughened. Splinters burned. She cursed once in a soft voice and smiled at herself. They set a door at the end of the small room and hung it on leather where hinges had failed. The first time it closed true and made a sound like a home, they both stood quiet. Nora took Eli's knife and carved a crooked heart into the new pale frame. She cut an E and an N beside it, not pretty deep enough to catch sawdust. Eli stood behind her and set his chin to her shoulder. He wrapped his arms around her and watched the light go from gold to blue through the gap where a window would be. Autumn found them with food enough that hunger did not sharpen the edges of things. Cold found every crack they had missed and taught them where to stuff moss and how to pack mud. Eli hunted and was gone for days. Nora watched the ridgeline and learned the certainty that sits under fear and does not bend to it. When he came over the hill with a deer on his shoulders and the look of a man who has been alone too long, she set the pot to boil and did not speak until he did. When the ground softened and turned the first green in months, Nora stood on the stoop with her hands folded low and her mouth trying on a smile it had never worn. Eli, she said as he came up from checking snares. He looked at her face and then at her hands. He stopped with something like surprise moving through him and down. She took his hand and set it on her belly. He knelt without thinking and pressed his ear to her. He laughed once, a small broken sound that put a shine on his eyes. A week later the heat came back hard. Eli walked out to the basin for water and came back shivering. He moved slow and kept his right arm close to his side. Nora watched and felt something cold lift the hair on her neck. She waited until he slept and rolled his sleeve. A small bruise sat on the inside of his elbow, dark and recent. He opened his eyes and saw her looking. He looked at the wall. "Tell me you did not," she said. The words were quiet. He swallowed. There was a wagon by the trading road, a baby with a dry cry, a mother with nothing left, a doctor out of Santa Fe with clean jars and $10 apiece. I took the money and left it under their wheel and told them to call it charity. Nora leaned her forehead against his and let out a breath that shook. "You cannot save the whole road," she said. She took his hand and set it on her belly. "This is the road you save." He nodded, eyes closed, and then opened them and made himself hold hers. "No more," he said. He did not say it like a man making a promise to please. He said it like a man learning where a promise belongs. Days stacked. He taught her to sit a small mare he had traded hides for a kind old thing with a sway back and a patient eye. He set her feet in the stirrups and told her to ride with her hips, not her hands. He placed a revolver in her palm and showed her how to break it open, how to feed it, how to clean it until the cloth came away white. Her first shots were dirty and loud. By the end of the week, the tin can at 20 paces moved when she asked it to. 2 travelers came at dusk when the heat was a skin on everything. A boy in a faded army coat and a girl with hollows under her eyes. They stood at the edge of the clearing and called soft for water. Eli watched their hands and saw that they shook from hunger and not from lies. Nora stepped to the bucket and brought them cups without asking names. They ate rabbit stew with the quiet of the starved. The story came out slow. A fort, an officer with promises, a road north with no guide but a hope that did not know better. Nora told them a version of their own story that fit 2 strangers. She spoke of hiding and building in a way that did not dress it up. Eli packed jerky and cornmeal in a sack and put his old knife in the boy's hand. "Follow the creek," he said. "It looks small, but it knows the way." When they were gone, the yard felt bigger. Nora stood with her shoulder against Eli and watched the last light drain. "They will make it," she said. "They have each other," he said. The first snow did not come with drama. It arrived one night in a clean hush and laid a thin blanket over every rock and scar. The wind tried the edges of the new door and found them tight. The fire in the hearth glowed steady. The room smelled of smoke and wool and the bread that Nora had learned to coax from flour and patience. She sat on the bed with her back to Eli's chest and his arms around her. Her fingers traced the scar on his chest, where her knife had gone to find a bullet. His hand covered hers, and then slid down to rest on the curve of her belly. The baby rolled once under both their hands. Eli pressed his mouth to her hair. She closed her eyes and listened to the sounds that meant they were not alone. His heart, her heart. The small drum inside her that knocked like a visitor on a good door. Outside, the coyotes sang and the sound bent on the snowy air and went thin. Inside, the carved heart on the door caught firelight and threw it back in a small, warm shape. Eli looked at it and then at the latch that held true. He set his chin on Nora's shoulder and spoke quiet enough that the room had to lean in to hear. "If they come," he said, "let them see the door. We are not hiding." Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.